president's nephew took my $2.6 million portfolio and got me fired. The non-solicitation gap my lawyer found let me take 21 clients before he filed his first report. Non-solicitation agreements are only as strong as the language used to define what solicitation means and which clients fall within the restricted category and under what conditions. Most people who sign them do not test those boundaries carefully before signing. I had tested mine during the week I negotiated my most recent contract renewal because I had worked at enough companies by that point to understand that the day you need to know what a clause means is never the day you have time to find out. The president's nephew had been in the company 11 weeks when he identified my $2.6 million book of business as an opportunity. He spent a month attending my client meetings as an observer. I allowed it. I was cordial and professional in every interaction, and I introduced him by name to every client contact we met together. I said nothing that indicated I understood his purpose because I was completing my own preparation in parallel. My attorney had confirmed 4 months earlier that the non-solicitation language in my agreement applied specifically to clients acquired during my employment through company-introduced channels. It did not apply to 21 of my accounts whose origins I had documented to a prior personal relationship, a referral made to me individually, or a contact established before the company relationship began. I gave notice on a Monday. I made calls Tuesday through Thursday. 21 clients had executed new agreements before the president's nephew had submitted his first monthly performance report. He called me from a number I did not recognize on a Friday afternoon. I recognized the area code. I did not answer. I'm 44, male, wealth management advisor, and the kind of person who reads his employment contracts the way other people read their horoscopes, carefully, skeptically, and with the specific intent of knowing what the universe is actually trying to tell me. I have a Series 7, a Series 65, a CFP designation, and a book of business I built from nothing over 14 years that was generating approximately $2.6 million in annual recurring advisory fees across 47 client accounts by the time this story starts. I did not inherit those clients. Nobody handed me a warm book. I drove to lunch meetings 2 hours away. I called people back on weekends. I sat with clients through 2 market downturns and talked more than one of them out of decisions that would have destroyed their retirement. 14 years of that. Every single account earned. I joined my current firm 9 years ago. Mid-sized regional wealth management shop, solid reputation, roughly $400 million in total AUM across the advisor team. The president built it from scratch starting in 2003, and for most of my tenure there, my relationship with him was productive and professional. I was consistently a top 2 revenue producer. They used my client retention numbers in recruiting materials. For 7 of my 9 years there, I was exactly what a firm like that wants an advisor to be: quiet, productive, and making everyone around me look good. Then his nephew arrived. The nephew was 29. Communications degree, Series 6 on his second attempt, 3 years at a cousin's insurance brokerage that his LinkedIn profile called Client Relationship Development. He walked in wearing a suit that cost more than my first car and carrying the specific confidence of someone who has never needed to earn anything in a room because the room usually belongs to a relative. The president introduced him at the all-hands meeting with the forced warmth of a man discharging a family obligation. He said the nephew was joining to develop skills across the full advisory spectrum, and that he hoped everyone would share their expertise. That phrase, share their expertise. I had been in this business long enough to know what that means when it comes from a company president standing next to a 29-year-old nephew who has never managed a client relationship of meaningful complexity. It means, let him sit in your meetings and learn your book. It means, your 14 years of work just became a training program for someone who didn't build it and couldn't have. I smiled, shook the nephew's hand, said something appropriate, and walked back to my office. Then I closed the door and pulled up my employment contract. Here is something that separates people who survive situations like this from people who don't: preparation timing. Most people read their non-solicitation clauses when they need to leave. By that point, the pressure is too high, the timeline is too short, and the clauses have already been written by attorneys who were paid to make them as restrictive as possible. I had made it a practice, after watching a colleague get financially destroyed in a client dispute 7 years earlier, to have an employment attorney review every contract I signed. Not just scan it. Review it. Every clause. Every defined term. Every carve-out. I had done this at my most recent renewal 14 months ago, and my attorney had flagged something that I had noted and filed away. The non-solicitation clause in my contract restricted me from soliciting clients introduced to, acquired through, or developed in connection with the firm's business operations during my employment. The language looked comprehensive. But my attorney had identified a structural limitation. It applied specifically to clients whose origination tied to a company channel. A firm referral. A firm-generated lead. A client introduced through the firm's network. It did not reach clients I had brought from prior personal relationships, clients referred to me individually through channels unconnected to the firm, or clients I had first established contact with before my employment at this firm began. 21 of my 47 accounts met those criteria. I had documented the origination of every single account in a private record I maintained outside any company system. Personal external hard drive. Home office. Locked drawer. 14 years of obsessive documentation, not because I anticipated this exact moment, but because I had understood early that in this industry, the difference between being right and being able to prove you're right is everything. I had 21 accounts outside the clause's reach. I knew that before the nephew ever shook my hand. What I didn't know yet was how aggressive his timeline was going to be. In his second week, he asked to sit in on client meetings. He framed it as learning. The president had endorsed it. I agreed, because refusing would have created a conflict that cost more than the exposure. But I started keeping a log. Every meeting he attended, date, client, topics discussed, anything that could be characterized as a proprietary introduction. I introduced him by name to every client we met together, professional courtesy, and gave him nothing more. No inside information. No relationship context. No strategic discussion of client needs, goals, or vulnerabilities. I kept everything client-focused and myself professionally cordial and personally distant. He attended 11 meetings over 4 weeks. And during those same 4 weeks, other things were happening that I cataloged carefully. The president's one-on-ones with the nephew ran longer than his check-ins with any senior advisor. The nephew started receiving performance reports previously distributed only at the partner level. And a junior associate I had mentored for 3 years mentioned, in passing, that the nephew had asked him about my renewal terms. Not suspiciously. Casually. The way someone asks when they already know the answer and just want confirmation of what they're inheriting. I called my attorney that Monday. Not to panic. To revisit. I asked her to confirm that the carve-out analysis from my renewal memo still held, given what I was observing. She reviewed it, asked clarifying questions about the origination documentation, and told me the 21 accounts were clean. Then she gave me something I hadn't asked for, a precise outline of what a proper resignation and post-resignation notification process looked like. No copying of proprietary data from company systems. Contact made using personal records only. Client communications framed as personal notification, not solicitation. Timing and sequencing mattered. I listened to every word. I wrote it down. Then I went back to work, smiled at the nephew in the hallway, and kept building my file. Week 8 was when I knew for certain. I had a routine check-in call scheduled with a client I had worked with for 11 years, a retired engineer, a man who had referred me to 4 other accounts, whose trust one had earned through 2 market downturns and at least one conversation where I talked him out of a real estate decision that would have cost him a significant chunk of his retirement. He called like clockwork, once a month, mostly to hear a calm voice confirm that everything was fine. His account had around $340,000 under management. The kind of client who doesn't just generate revenue, he generates referrals, loyalty, and the kind of professional validation that you can't put a number on. I took the call at my desk with my door half open. No reason to close it. About 8 minutes in, the nephew appeared in my doorway without knocking. He was holding a folder. He positioned himself just inside the threshold, close enough to hear my half of the conversation, far enough to be technically in the hall, and waited. I held up one finger. He nodded. He did not move. He stood there for the remaining 6 minutes of the call. He heard my client mention that he was fully retired now and thinking about reviewing his allocation. He heard the warmth in how my client and I talked, the easy familiarity of 11 years. I finished the call. I looked at the nephew. "What do you need?" I said. He held up the folder. Single printed email inside. A compliance update I had already received digitally. He said he wanted to make sure I had seen it. He smiled the specific smile of someone who is not actually smiling. And he left. That night I wrote in my log, Week 8, Thursday. Nephew present unannounced in doorway during client call. Duration 6 minutes. Client discussed retirement status, upcoming allocation review. That was the last night I gave him the benefit of any doubt. Over the following 3 weeks, the pattern became unmistakable. He positioned himself near my workspace during heavy call hours. He volunteered to carry materials to conference rooms before my client meetings. He appeared at the coffee station adjacent to my office at the same times every morning. None of it was against any rule. All of it was mapping. He was learning the contours of a book he intended to take. Week 10 brought the move that made everything explicit. I arrived at a conference room 5 minutes before a scheduled meeting with a client couple, mid-50s, approaching retirement, $290,000 in assets that had grown from $160,000 over 6 years with me, and found the nephew already inside. He had printed a portfolio overview with the firm's branding, not my format, and placed copies at 2 of the 4 seats. He said the president had mentioned some structural changes to how meetings were handled and he was going to sit in. I picked up the documents he had placed at the client seats and moved them to my side of the table without comment. I said, pleasantly, that I hadn't been notified of any structural changes and that if the president wanted to discuss that, we should connect separately. Then I opened my laptop and waited. He looked at me for a moment. Then he took his folder and left. I ran the meeting. It went well. Then I emailed my attorney a full account of the conference room incident. She wrote back the next morning, keep logging. Don't escalate internally yet. Let him make the next move. He made it in week 11. The president called me in for a performance check-in, standard quarterly cadence, nothing unusual in the format. But the agenda was something I had not seen before. The president had a document prepared by the nephew, a client relationship review, analyzing the firm's top book of business for efficiency opportunities. My accounts were categorized by revenue, tenure, and relationship dependency, meaning the degree to which client retention depended on their personal relationship with me versus the firm's platform. The president was measured. He said it wasn't about performance. He said it was about succession planning and reducing key person concentration risk. He said the nephew had real potential and that he'd like me to start including him more directly, not just observing, but actively walking him through client engagement strategy. I'd like you to start including him more directly, the president said. Actually walking him through your approach. I looked at the document. Then I looked at the president. Am I understanding this correctly? I said. You're asking me to train a colleague to manage my clients. A pause. Not long. But real. I'm asking you to support team development, he said. I nodded. I said I understood and would think about how best to approach that. I shook his hand. I walked back to my office and sat down. I opened my personal email on my phone and sent my attorney 4 words, the timeline is moving. She called me within the hour. We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of the call, I had a clear framework. The carve-out documentation was confirmed sufficient. The notification process was mapped. The next step was identifying where I was going before I gave notice, so that when I moved completely. I needed 30 days to get everything in place, a new firm, logistics, personal records organized, without touching a single piece of company-owned data or signaling anything internally. 30 days. The company gave me 28. 13 weeks into the nephew's tenure, I received an HR meeting request with a subject line that read, Employment Status Discussion. Not performance review. Not check-in. Employment Status Discussion. That language is not accidental. HR departments use that phrase when the decision has already been made and they need to process the administrative outcome. The meeting was scheduled for Monday. I forwarded the email to my attorney at 7:30 p.m. She called me back at 8:15. Her voice had the particular calm of someone who has seen exactly this before and knows exactly what to do about it. Don't wait until Monday, she said. Give written notice Friday morning. To HR and the president simultaneously. I'll have language to you by tomorrow morning. They'll say I resigned to avoid termination, I said. They can say it, she said. The record will show the sequence of events. You submitted notice. What they had planned for Monday doesn't matter anymore. You control the narrative now. I gave notice Friday at 8 a.m. Written. Formal. Both recipients simultaneously, as she had directed. The president called my cell at 8:17. I did not answer. By Friday afternoon, I had a signed letter of intent with a new firm, an independent RIA where I had a prior professional relationship with the principal and where we had discussed a partnership arrangement across 3 separate conversations in the preceding 6 weeks. The terms were good. Significantly better than where I had been. My name on the materials. Equity participation. A structure built around what I brought, not what the firm's brand condescended to let me keep. I went home. I opened the locked drawer in my home office. I connected the external hard drive to my personal laptop. And I started building the call list. What happened Tuesday through Thursday of that week is not complicated to describe, but I want to describe it precisely, because the precision is the point. There is a legal and ethical difference between soliciting a client and notifying them of a professional transition, and that difference is not semantic. It is the entire foundation of what I did and why it held up when they came after me. My attorney had been explicit about the framework. The communication needed to be a notification. I am informing you of a change in my professional situation. I have joined a new firm. I will no longer be serving as your advisor at my prior firm. You will receive communication from that firm about your account. If you have questions about your options, I am available. That is not a pitch. It is not a comparison. It is not disparagement of the prior firm or any individual there. It is a professional courtesy that any advisor owes a long-term client when a transition occurs, and it is legally distinct from solicitation when executed in the way my attorney outlined. I started Tuesday at 8 a.m. with the retired engineer. 11 years. My first call. I told him I was leaving the firm. I told him his account was in good standing and that he would hear from them soon. I told him I had joined a new firm and wanted him to have that information before he received any communication that might cause confusion. He was quiet for a moment. Where are you going? He asked. I gave him the name. I'll follow you, he said. I told him he didn't have to decide anything immediately. I told him to take whatever time he needed. I've known you 11 years, he said. I'm not starting over with somebody who doesn't know my situation. I documented the call. Time, duration, summary, outcome. I made 21 calls over those 3 days. Every call followed the same framework. Notification. Information. No pressure. No pitch. Document everything. The clients led. I followed. By Thursday afternoon, 19 had verbally indicated they intended to transition to the new firm. 2 said they needed more time. I told both of them I understood completely and that there was no pressure. Both called me back by Friday morning. 21 out of 21. I want to say something clearly. The remaining 26 accounts in my book were within the non-solicitation clause's scope, and I made 0 contact with any of them. 0. My attorney had been unambiguous about this line, and I respected it completely. A few of those clients called me. They heard through other clients or their own networks that I had moved, and in each case, I told them politely that I wasn't able to discuss their account situation and that they should contact the firm directly. I logged those calls too. Every one. What I did not fully anticipate was the shape of the reaction when the nephew discovered what had happened. I learned later, through discovery, which I'll get to, that the president had told the nephew, explicitly, that he would be taking over my book of business. Not shadowing. Not learning. Taking over. The plan had been to terminate me at the Monday meeting, process a severance, and install the nephew in a structured client transition over several months, with the firm controlling the narrative and the introductions. The nephew would step into warm relationships with clients who had no advance warning and no opportunity to consider their options before being handed to someone they had met twice. What they had not accounted for was that I would be gone on my own terms, with my legal position intact, with 21 clients already notified, and with a new firm already operational. The nephew called me Friday afternoon from an unknown number. I recognized the area code, 615, Nashville. I almost answered thinking it was a client I knew in that market. Then I checked the specific number against my contacts. It wasn't my client. I let it ring. No voicemail. He called again Saturday morning from a different number. Same area code. I didn't answer. Saturday afternoon, he texted from a third number, "We need to talk about the client transition. Some of these people are saying they're moving. You need to call me." I screenshot the text and sent it to my attorney within 60 seconds. She called back in 20 minutes. "Do not respond," she said. "Not by any channel. Screenshot every contact attempt and send it to me. The firm now knows clients are moving, which means they're going to move fast. I'd expect a cease and desist within 2 weeks." She was right about the timing. She was right about everything. The cease and desist arrived at my home address on a Wednesday, 12 days after my resignation. 12 pages. Breach of non-solicitation, misappropriation of confidential client information, tortious interference with business relationships, unjust enrichment. It demanded I immediately cease all contact with former clients, return all documentation derived from my employment, provide a full accounting of client contacts made since resignation, and pay unspecified damages described only as substantial. It listed 21 clients by name. I read the letter twice. Then I called my attorney. "They named all 21, I told her." "Good," she said. "That means they've committed to a legal theory that we can defeat on the origination documentation. If they had been smarter, they would have tried to negotiate before filing. Now they've shown their hand and we have a record to respond to." The response went out within 7 business days. It did not concede a single point. It cited the carve-out language by section. It referenced the origination documentation by category, not disclosing the full contents, but making clear the documentation existed and was sufficient. It stated that the 21 accounts fell outside the clause's scope and that any litigation would be vigorously defended. The response was professional. Precise. And it was a warning shot aimed directly at the weakest point in their legal theory. They filed suit in state court 3 weeks later. Civil litigation in the United States operates on a timeline that is genuinely slow, and I want to be honest about that because a lot of people reading this may have watched legal dramas and developed expectations that don't match reality. There are no dramatic courtroom revelations in the first month. There is discovery, which is the process by which both sides request and exchange documentation, and there are procedural filings, and there are conference calls between attorneys discussing whether a given document falls within the scope of a given request. It takes time. But within the pace of normal civil litigation, this case moved with urgency because both sides were motivated. The firm was motivated because 21 accounts at an average annual advisory fee of roughly $55,000 per account represented approximately $1.15 million in annual recurring revenue that had walked out the door in 3 days. That is not a number a firm ignores. That is the kind of number that ends careers and reshapes organizational strategy. The president had built his pitch deck around my retention numbers. Watching $1.15 million leave in 72 hours had real consequences for the firm's total AUM and for the narrative they told prospective clients and advisor recruits. I was motivated because the cease and desist hung over my new business like a cloud, and my 21 transition clients deserved certainty about the legal status of their accounts. Discovery is where cases turn. When the firm's attorneys issued their discovery requests, they were comprehensive: all documentation related to client origination, all client communications from 60 days prior to resignation through present, all records related to my decision to resign, all financial records related to my arrangement with the new firm. My attorney produced exactly what we were required to produce, in the format and scope required, and not a document more than that. The origination file went in. All 21 accounts. Email chains from prior firms showing initial relationship establishment. Referral records with dates. Meeting notes from before my current employment began. Communication records from personal accounts predating the firm relationship. The documentation was organized, labeled, and complete. Every account had a paper trail that placed its origination outside the contractual restriction. The firm's attorney went quiet for 11 days after receiving the production. Then he requested mediation. We agreed. In mediation, the firm's lead counsel, a composed, experienced attorney who I suspect had already done the math before the session began, walked through the origination documentation and asked clarifying questions. He was professional about it. About 40 minutes in, he set down his pen and looked at the exhibit binder we had prepared. He was quiet for a moment that was longer than any previous pause in the session. Then he looked at his co-counsel. Then at the mediator. The calculation he was running was this: pursue the litigation to trial, spend significant legal fees, and face a high probability of losing on the carve-out argument, which would create a public court record that undermined every non-solicitation agreement the firm had ever asked an employee to sign, or settle on terms that closed the case, kept the outcome out of the public record, and let the firm move forward without a precedent-setting loss attached to their name. They chose to settle. I signed a confidentiality agreement as part of the settlement, so I cannot disclose specific terms. What I can tell you is that the settlement did not require me to return any clients. It did not require me to pay any damages. It did not restrict me from continuing to serve the 21 accounts. It contained no admission of wrongdoing on my part. My attorney looked at the final agreement and used the phrase, "clean walk." That is what 7 years of documentation, 1 well-negotiated contract clause, 1 thorough attorney review, and 3 days of disciplined phone calls gets you. A clean walk. Now let me tell you what happened inside the firm during those months. Through discovery, my attorneys had obtained internal communications produced as responsive to our requests. What those communications showed was the full picture of what the nephew had been set up to receive and what actually happened when he received it. The president had told him explicitly, in a written message sent the week before my resignation, a message that became part of the discovery record, that the nephew would be taking on the primary relationship management responsibilities for my accounts once the transition was complete. He had been told it was going to be a clean handoff. Warm introductions. Established relationships. A book worth $2.6 million in annual fees, handed to him by the firm because his uncle decided he deserved it. What he actually received was 26 accounts he had never meaningfully spoken with, in a book that had been reduced by nearly half in revenue terms, managed under the shadow of active litigation that the firm's leadership had not fully anticipated. The nephew tried. I'll give him that much. He reached out to the remaining 26 accounts, the ones I had made zero contact with, the ones properly within the non-solicitation scope. The response rate, according to the internal communications, was poor from the start. Clients who called asking questions about my departure were told I had moved on to other opportunities, which was technically accurate and substantively misleading, and several of them found the response unsatisfying enough to start evaluating alternatives. 3 accounts initiated closure within 60 days of my departure. Not to me. I had made no contact with them and would not have, under any circumstances. But to other advisors at other firms. They left because the relationship had been with me, and when I was gone, the firm's platform and the nephew's proximity to the president were not sufficient substitutes for 11, 8, 6 years of genuine trust built transaction by transaction. That was $430,000 in additional annual recurring revenue the firm lost from accounts I had never touched in the post-resignation period. They lost it because they had built a plan around taking my book and hadn't accounted for the possibility that a client's loyalty might be personal rather than institutional. The president, I was told by a former colleague I maintained legitimate contact with, was furious about the outcome. Not at me. At that point the lawsuit had told him the legal story fairly clearly. He was furious at the nephew. The nephew had identified an opportunity, had been handed the infrastructure to execute it, had spent 3 months positioning himself to take over a $2.6 million book, and had then managed to generate worse outcomes than if the whole scheme had never been attempted. The nephew resigned from the firm 6 months after my departure. I don't know the exact circumstances. I don't particularly care. I heard about it through the same former colleague and I noted it without much reaction. He came in with entitlement and the protection of a family relationship and the expectation that he could take what someone else had built. He left having failed at the thing that was handed to him. I want to tell you what happened on my side in those same months, because this story is not just about what they lost. It's about what I built. My 21 accounts transitioned cleanly. The paperwork was completed, the assets transferred, and by the end of the first month, every one of those clients was fully operational at the new firm. 2 of them added assets within the first 6 months, 1 client consolidated accounts from another institution they had been holding separately, which brought their total managed assets up significantly. My book at the new firm reached $1.8 million in annual recurring fees by the end of the first year. Lower than the $2.6 million I had carried at my prior firm, but growing in a structure where the economics were more favorable, where my name was on the front of the materials, and where I was a partner rather than a revenue source the firm felt entitled to reallocate. By month 14, I had brought in 7 new accounts, all through referrals from the transition clients. The retired engineer, the one I had called first on that Tuesday morning, referred a friend to me about 4 months after the transition. He called me on a Thursday and said he had told his friend about me and that his friend was looking for a new advisor. He said he had told his friend that I was the kind of advisor who does things right. The friend became a client. His account is in good standing. I don't have a complicated moral to offer here. I'm 44. I have built 2 versions of the same book of business over 14 years because I understood, early enough to matter, that documentation is a form of preparation and preparation is a form of power. When the nephew and the president looked at my 47 accounts, they saw a revenue stream they could redirect. What they did not see was the file on my external hard drive, or the attorney review I had commissioned 14 months prior, or the 21 carve-out accounts I had already mapped before anyone gave me a reason to count them. The day you need to know what a contract clause means is never the day you have time to find out. I found out 14 months early. The nephew found out when my attorney's response letter landed in his firm's legal department, and by then, 21 clients had already signed new agreements, and there was nothing left to dispute except who was going to pay the legal fees for a case that was already over. He never left a voicemail on that Friday call. I've always thought that was telling. Some part of him already knew. If you read all 4 parts waiting to see how it ended, you're exactly the kind of person who needs to subscribe, because I've got more stories where preparation beat entitlement every single time.